At the rate that AI is both learning, that organizations are investing in the foundational models, they're increasing in capacity at the rate CPUs did using Moore's law. So their capabilities are constantly changing and constantly adapting. So while using a static pilot program might have been something you did in the past, you want a more evolving program where you allow them potentially a segregated network where they could try different tools, different tool sets. Because making a decision on a tool today in 3 months, the capabilities might have doubled or tripled.
Welcome to AI, Government and the Future, a podcast by Corner Alliance. We explore the intersection of artificial intelligence, government and the future. We work with government to create results. We ignite your agency's mission by helping you to design and implement high-impact and innovative federal programs in AI, broadband, cybersecurity, public safety, and more. Being a government ally is at the core of all we do.
Welcome back to AI, Government in the Future. I'm your host, Marc Leh. Today, I'm thrilled to be joined by Christophe Foulon. Chris is a cybersecurity expert with over 15 years of experience dedicated to transforming and managing information security strategies across a range of different industries, from financial services to healthcare to higher education and nonprofits. As the founder of CPF Coaching and a fractional CISO at several leading organizations, Chris has been at the forefront of helping businesses navigate the complexities of cybersecurity while enabling secure growth. He's also an adjunct professor, author, and co-host of Breaking Into Cybersecurity podcast, where he shares his deep expertise and passion for helping others transition into the cybersecurity field. His unique blend of practical experience and educational contributions makes him a leading voice in the field of cybersecurity. Welcome, Chris. Thanks for joining us on the podcast.
Thank you for having me on. Excited to be here.
Absolutely. So I wanted to open by kind of digging into your background and exploring your motivation for pursuing a field in cybersecurity. So, you've held roles from fractional CISO to an adjunct professor. Can you share a little bit more about your journey into cybersecurity and what inspired you to focus on the field to begin with?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it started all from my history in IT. I was a kid in the Caribbean, and the island PC Tech shoe was working to upgrade our business PC, had motherboard, chips, new hard drive, all out on the floor, and it just got me interested. From there, kind of went into infrastructure support, and the first day on my role, someone had a username and password on a Post-it note. And from there, I said, there's got to be a better way. So from that, I kind of worked to find ways with the business to help enable them while doing it in a safe manner. That kind of got me from helping organizations moving from on-prem to the cloud and helping them with that digital transformation, understanding the shared responsibility model as you transition and you do that transformation, and then understanding where the risk is and what we can do to help mitigate that.
Well, with over 15 years of experience and with experience across different industries, finance, healthcare, education, I guess what have some of the biggest challenges been related to modernizing cybersecurity strategies kind of in the long term? And then most recently, maybe integrating some AI capabilities into an overall enterprise cybersecurity strategy?
So in the beginning, the challenges were around moving data center infrastructure into the cloud. That means potentially modernizing the application stack, redeveloping for the cloud so that you aren't using a lift and shift model and you can optimize your cost and implementation status. After that, it was then starting to look at the different planes that you needed to protect. Your identity plane, your data plane, your application plane, and then your secure application as a service sprawl, so your SaaS sprawl. Today, it's really focused around that SaaS sprawl. And for many organizations, they don't know that they're already using some sort of generative AI service if they're not monitoring their SaaS sprawl. So a couple of years ago, it was everyone's storing stuff in the cloud. Everyone's come to, or most organizations have come to the realization that that is true, and they need to really find out where their assets are living in the cloud. Today, it's about focusing where have our stakeholders unwillingly or willingly started to use generative AI services, and what can we do to enable them in a safe manner to use those types of capabilities, but better understand the risk by either using enterprise-grade services, bringing those models in-house, understanding the use cases for what they want to use generative AI or any sort of AI for, and how we can enable them to do that under our vigilance and control.
That's a great point. Chris, if you could define SaaS sprawl for our audience, we're talking a lot about AI as it pertains to government or public sector missions. How, from your perspective, would SaaS sprawl look or be characterized at a federal agency or a large business, for example?
So no matter whether it's federal or it's corporate, there's going to be individuals that want to do things that you're not currently enabling them for. So what do? They go out and they put it on their own credit card. They use free services. They go on their personal device and access it that way. They do it from home. They'll find ways to use services to get their job done. Our job as security professionals is to help enable them to do that in a safe way. So when we see that type of activity, it's a symptom that we're not providing the services in-house that they need to achieve their role. And we need to really work with them to redefine what can we do in regards to services to enable them to achieve that.
Yeah, that's a great point. Before we get into, I wanted to explore how people may be intentionally or unintentionally using some generative AI applications during their day-to-day work. But Chris, any recommendations, low-hanging fruit in terms of how to enable staff members or employees of an enterprise to get their job done, as you're saying, in a safe or secure way that is kind of a easy first step for organizations to ensure they're kind of moving in the direction of security compliance?
I would say start with an awareness campaign. Reach out to your stakeholders, see if there's business functions that you're trying to achieve that you're blocking them from doing, that they can't do with their current tool stack, and then find ways within either your existing budget or plan for your next year budget to start to implement tools and services that would allow them to achieve that. Especially if you're working within a government space, the rate of getting a contract on could be anywhere from 6 to 18 months, depending on the size and scope of the contract. So you want to start to be planning those services really early on within your budgetary cycle, as well as putting out your RFIs, your RFPs from new and up and coming companies that can start to address some of the concerns that you're looking to address and work with your agency to develop that solution.
Well said. And circling back to the, as part of this software as a service sprawl, the ecosystem of applications that people may or may not be authorized to use, how have you seen generative AI applications kind of come into play in the SaaS sprawl orbit? Are people using unintentionally generative AI?
They see a cool tool. They hear about it on the news. It's free to try. Let me go put my data in it. Help me create a report. Help me create a graph, generate a marketing image. But first, you need to tell me what exactly you want to generate. What services are you provided? What are you doing? And every single input, a prompt from a user could potentially reveal something sensitive that you're working on. And as a government agency, if you're working on classified information or you upload classified information willingly or unwillingly to try to get your work done, it could expose information. An example of that, I was at a conference a couple months ago, and a federal agency was working to do a proof of concept with a generative AI company. They were testing some of the prompts and they said, whoops, we got to pull out because in testing the open source information from that AI company, they found classified information being provided back to them based on their prompts. Because they hadn't provided any information, this information was already out there, leaked, or obtained in an unapproved fashion. So they had to pull out. So that's just an example of how generative AI is accessing a vast amount of data. And the more you feed it willingly or unwillingly, it amounts into the training models that it uses.
Even at a consulting firm like Corner Alliance, my employer, we have to acknowledge, a responsible AI use policy prior to even logging into our Google Workspace, given that a lot of these capabilities are embedded in productivity apps at some point. So outside of maybe developing kind of a code of conduct that employees sign or waiting for top-down federal regulations to get developed, are there specific strategies or actions that businesses could adopt to effectively promote responsible use or intentional use of generative AI applications from your perspective?
So one, from a monitoring perspective, monitor for those new AIs. I mean, looking up the website, there's an AI for that. There's over 15,000 different AI models available today. Some of them may be using similar base training models or foundational models, but they're providing slightly different use cases. That being said, so you monitor for that use. Secondly, awareness campaigns, education campaigns to work with your user base to see where they could use that. Do workshops with them in regards to the possibilities or the access to generative AI or other sorts of AI tools that have been approved for use. Because most of the times, they don't know that you have an AI tool that could potentially be approved for use, but you haven't told them about it. So that education and awareness strategy is going to be the second aspect. The third aspect is once you see that use happening, you reach out to that user, you reach out to that department and figure out what was the business use case that they use that outside solutions as a service provider for, and then work with them to develop either an internal method or provide that on the roadmap for future development.
I've seen some language around Gemini receiving FedRAMP approval in the near future. And so having a list of whatever authorized or FedRAMPed AI applications that may or may not align with the use case topic list that organizations like Department of Homeland Security, Health and Human Services have published recently. I think having a credible, centralized source of information for what can't be done or what platforms are authorized for what purpose could be help with that awareness campaign that you're speaking of. I guess at a higher level, how do you see current government regulations or future regulations shaping deployment strategies or overall R&D innovation ecosystem for AI here in the United States?
Before I answer that, let's take a step back and let's look at the design architecture of how you could use AI. So everyone thinks of AI as internal data, external processor, but that's not true. There's a lot of foundational models that provide the model for use inside your organization. So while you might not have a FedRAMP approved provider that could provide you with that service externally of your organizations, there's foundational models that you can use on your own compute with your own data that never leaves your corporate limits or your federal organizational limits. And working with your security department and your development department, you could potentially use some of those for internal use cases. Now, in regards to federal law, there's a lot of use around AI, NIST AI playbook with regards to supporting AI implementation using a secure AI framework for that. I would recommend that you keep up with that NIST AI playbook to see how you're making recommendations. If you have a target organization that is looking to work with you on a certain AI implementation, using that playbook and being able to demonstrate that to your ISO and your security team as to how you're already applying and using federal requirements to test and verify and see the risk that you're trying to do and justify that, you can then work towards getting your sign off for internal approval.
NIST is often leading the thought leadership around cybersecurity best practices and kind of how-to guides for integrating AI capabilities into a enterprise architecture, on-site computing capability. So I think that's a great recommendation. I think in terms of policy recommendations that you would find effective, we talk a lot on this podcast around, balancing the need for smart, potentially ethical development of AI tools while not constraining, the creativity and innovation that's giving the United States a competitive edge in the development of new AI-based tools and corporate positioning there. Are there any sort of best practices or policy recommendations that you have that strikes that balance between smart use of these, productivity or creativity tools and providing kind of the development community the space and freedom to meet market demand?
I like the anthropic model. I like where there's transparency in regards to what you're doing, how you're doing it, where you're getting the data, what you're using the data for, so that both the public, regulators that provide oversight, as well as your internal team know what you're trying to achieve. Secondarily, try to do no harm with regards to using AI. Have a human in the loop for verification of any critical decisions, test and validate your outputs, because there's inherent biases in humans, there's inherent biases in programming, and therefore there'll potentially be inherent biases in the way the algorithms that are used to develop these AI models that make decisions. So you want to ensure that you're testing and validating the output from your AI models against these inherent biases. Work with the community to test and validate the algorithm that you're using or the outputs that you're using. If you're working in a potentially sensitive area and you have a watchdog agency or a watchdog company that kind of provides oversight in that area, working hand in hand with them about their concerns that you're seeing in the space allows you that freedom and that understanding to see what you should be looking out for. And then you can work with them on testing and validating that you're not seeing those types of biases or that type of risk in your production.
Makes me think of two kind of concepts that have been top of mind for me recently. One is you're talking about the idea of having a fully, transparent, traceable, logical workflow that illustrates how an AI-driven model is behaving. And I think that that's certainly kind of a core element of the early stages of considering to adopt an AI tool in a business process or a federal agency process would be to understand what is the problem this AI tool is going to solve, make sure that you're selecting the right tool set for the problem at hand, and then beginning to document the logic of how the tool would operate and identifying, the sources of information that the model would use to train or get smart on how your organization does things, and criteria or decision points with different weightings that will produce outputs that are in line with your expectation. I think agencies and businesses have tremendous kind of creative control over those like tunable elements of an AI model if they understand them and they're communicated clearly by technical staff. So, Chris, anything else from like a traceability or transparency and model explainability perspective that you would think is high priority for making the case for or against why an AI-driven model should be used in government or business operations?
I would start with efficiencies of scale. Using an AI tool, as you mentioned, allows you to scale the amount of decision points within a given area tremendously. Outside thoughts, because you tend to have groupthink within your organization for the types of decision. And by using an AI model, could remove some of that inherent groupthink bias that's there and in those decision points. And then lastly, because you're using this, you can augment the skill set that you have within your team so that you can remove potentially some of the mundane tasks that are repetitive and they do over and over. That tends to draw down the morale of the team, because you're like, oh, I'm clicking this alert every day, or I'm doing the same thing over and over every day. That could be something that's automated, and then you leave them free to do some of the more creative or more critical thinking skills that they were brought in for. Many government employees have masters and PhDs in given areas, and then they end up in roles that they're not using the critical thinking skills for. So if you free them up to do that, then you have a huge capacity of brain power that now allows them to do what they were educated to do by our government.
When I think that's something that I have been trying to emphasize during day-to-day conversations is advocating for purpose-built AI tools augmenting your day-to-day activities to free up higher order thinking or more productivity and just make your job easier, kind of embracing this as these tools as something to develop a template or do a first draft of a brainstorming session to kind of get the conversation started. But in your experience, have you seen an effective method of maybe balancing between inherent risk aversion or avoiding trying something new with the need to validate, train, and iterate AI models? I feel like there's a little bit of a chicken and the egg problem because a lot of organizations are risk averse and don't want to adopt AI tools in their business operations or IT architecture. But there's an inherent need to have kind of a test bed or pilot program in order to see how this might enhance the organization or increase productivity, deliver ROI of some kind. Are there any talking points or strategies that you've seen proven to be effective in navigating that duality?
I would say that at the rate that AI is both learning, that organizations are investing in the foundational models, they're increasing in capacity at the rate CPUs did using Moore's law. So their capabilities are constantly changing and constantly adapting. So while using a static pilot program might have been something you did in the past, you want a more evolving program where you allow them potentially a segregated network where they could try different tools, different tool sets. Because making a decision on a tool today in 3 months, the capabilities might have doubled or tripled. So you can't make the same decision point that you did back then. And going back and redoing your decision tree for that large budgetary decision might not be something that you can do. So potentially including contractual terms where instead of you're set on a certain model or you're set on a certain functionality, that it's more of a service that they provide. So as their capability increases, so does yours. As they invest in augmenting their training model, their foundational model, you work with them and then you get that capacity as well. So it's kind of working together with the service provider that is not just a static delivery like the federal government likes, but more a fluid delivery of service that can't be as easily defined in contractual terms, but there should be SLAs or service level agreements that you work with the provider on defining so that they're providing a service rather than a delivered program or something like you've done in the past.
Are there key items in that service level agreement, whether it's technical requirements, kind of the overall scope or intent of the effort that you, Chris, find particularly important to ensure that the customer and the provider agree on and have clear alignment on prior to collaborating?
Really is defined based on each individual use case. So you do need to work with your service provider on what the use case is that you're delivering. So some of that might be availability. Some of it might be integrity. So you're validating the outputs, and the outputs need to be at a given quality for your work staff. And if they start reporting that the response from the prompt, a lot of thumbs down from the outputs, you use that as a service metric for continually grading the level of service that you're getting from them.
We do at Cornerline some program evaluation, evaluating economic or social impacts of federal interventions. And, when considering how government agencies may leverage, adopt, provide guidance on responsible use of AI tools, I'm constantly going back to the concept of how do you measure the return on investment of a project focused on integrating an AI chatbot to a certain agency website? Are there performance metrics or ROI metrics that, Chris, you have seen proven to be effective with measuring the impact or effectiveness of cybersecurity interventions that might be relevant to measuring how an organization is impacted by the adoption of an AI tool?
That's a hard one. I would say functionality wise, most of the time, AI tools are driven to deliver a service. So if that service can be delivered in a safe and effective manner, that's one. The second is the adoption rate by whoever your client base is. So, for example, I applied at an organization a while ago. Their application process was actually a chatbot. And at first I thought, oh, it's a sales chatbot. But no, it was the application in a chatbot form. And while it was all the standard questions that you have in a static site, the fact that it was responsive to me leaving the web page and going somewhere else, it paused. It didn't complete the process. It waited till I returned to continue. So you can measure follow through rate. You can measure how well your customers are adopting to that change in service by whether they completed the submission process, whether there is an increase of phone calls or emails or complaints, whether your team has said, oh, well, all of a sudden we're not getting anything. Well, that's scary. Or all of a sudden we're getting too much. That's scary as well. So you have to work on balancing that and tuning and optimizing what you're trying to deliver for your workforce.
And in terms of going back to kind of government positioning on AI regulation, what role do you see government agencies playing in terms of specifying rules or guidelines governing the use of AI foundational models or more niche applications in either public sector operations or more broadly across the United States? Are there big roles that you see or play?
As a chapter InfraGard president for the national chapter region, keeping up on this is something that I do. With the White House mandate that new foundational models that are a certain size, targeting a certain sector, need approval, I think that's definitely necessary. You do need a level of oversight in regards to the development of those foundational models, which then can be, in turn, cause critical harm to our nation. So that's one aspect. So providing that oversight. But the other aspect is working with those companies to aid and develop their development in a cohesive fashion. So, for example, the investments that they've made with Intel in developing chip plants here in the US versus relying on Taiwan to develop that production, that ensures that our supply chain is more stable, that we're able to produce those chips that then do the computation for our AI programs. So you have to look at the ecosystem as a whole and work with the ecosystem as a whole to develop that holistic approach.
Chris, any recommendations on or ideas around how trends, whether technical or policy related in AI and cybersecurity may evolve, over the next 12, 24 months that may impact how these tools and services are presented or accessed by the public?
That could be a political situation. I don't know. Each administration takes a slightly different approach as to how they address this. The only thing that I would try to recommend is some sort of continuity in the underlying government agencies that are monitoring and supporting these types of innovation, the incubation labs that they have for innovating new solutions, working with the different federal agencies on custom programs to develop new specific niche solution sets, whether it be for the DoD, whether it be for internal use or even public sector use. Like Google is working with the infrastructure within cities and Google Maps to relieve congestion by tweaking how red lights go on and off and potentially changing them a half a second sooner and then relieving congestion in the long run for the city. So working with those service providers on implementing solutions, because you need a test bed, you need an area to develop, So work with those solution providers, help them provide that infrastructure test bed to do some large scale testing so that they can evolve those services for the greater good of everyone.
Absolutely. Well, any other recommendations on how private businesses can stay ahead of some of these regulatory challenge or changes to ensure that AI, tools or AI supported services or products that they present remain secure and competitive globally?
I would say, first of all, if you're in the space, you work with others in the space. There's a lot of research grants that fund this sort of initiative, this type of research, whether that be with your state or local universities or that be directly with the agencies. There's a lot of dollars spent in research, but the only way for you to find out is for you to get involved and you to do that research on those grants, on that funding available for that collaboration. If you try to do it on your own, you're going to get left out.
To close, given your expertise in cybersecurity, are there key steps or best practices that business leaders, government leaders should take to ensure that, their strategy, whether it's adoption or development strategy, remains effective, secure, and impactful moving forward?
I would say develop agile approaches to monitoring and development. The old waterfall approach, the old 18-month budget cycle approach, while it might work good for the large federal government, it really hampers innovation. So finding ways to have budgetary spending that could be more agile, finding ways to rate your service providers in an agile fashion, continuous monitoring, having dashboards, having reports generated instantaneously for you to check in on their quality of service, their level of service, their uptime, and then holding them accountable. I think oftentimes once you've gotten into a contract, it's hard to kick people out, but you need to divine contractual terms that say, if you're not up to these service levels, we'll have remediations and we'll potentially remove you from the contract and bring in another service provider that can deliver on that service that we need.
Great. Well, Chris, thanks so much for joining us this afternoon. And for the listeners, where can they check out more of your work?
So Breaking Into Cybersecurity is available on YouTube for those that are looking to transition from the military service into the federal or civilian space. I support an organization called the Whole Cyberhuman Initiative, where we provide open source training for free. And then we also work on the back end with organizations and federal agencies to train their workforce through grants and other initiatives.
Great. Christophe Foulon, thank you so much for joining us today. And we will talk to you soon and appreciate you joining the podcast.
Absolutely. Excited to be here. Thank you for having me on.
AI, Government and the Future is brought to you by Corner Alliance. To find out more about Corner Alliance and how we work with government to create results, visit our website at corneralliance.com. And then make sure to search for AI Government Future in Apple Podcasts, Spotify and Google Podcasts, or anywhere else podcasts are found. And click subscribe so you don't miss any future episodes. On behalf of the team here at Corner Alliance, thanks for listening.